My name is Naomi Tavares. My passion for language has led me to both studying the techniques for the development of language learning as well as to making my first foray into the world of writing with the creation of this fantastic work of literature. With it, I hope to kickstart a fascinating saga in which the reader can enjoy the adventures from the character of Alexandra while empathizing with the profound underlying message that I want to portray. For this work, I relied on the collaboration of my mother, Silvia Gonzalez, who has several books published in the genre of short stories and who has provided me with her experience and assistance on the steps which were necessary to turn this project into a reality. To my family, for their unconditional support and help, without which this project would not have been possible. To understand this story, it is necessary to go back to its origin. To do this, we'll go back billions of years to a moment in history in which every living being was fully aware of their divine nature, and all lived under the constant vibration of love. But this wouldn't be the case for much longer. These beings, who in principle were full of light and love, had then begun to abuse their powers and rights as children of the Creator, thereby establishing chaos and disorder in the universe. Brahman, the supreme God, decided to end this situation in a very ingenious way. He hid the divine powers in a place where he knew that very few would seek them, the interior of each being. After this act, the divine projections that at some point had been fused with the entirety were now lost and disoriented, wandering around the universe aimlessly. But not all was lost for mankind. Brahman placed 3 magic drops on the tongues of each of these humans, which would produce a never-ending thirst, so that sooner or later they could find their way back home. From this moment, duality was established, and with it, 2 new kingdoms originated, Prema and Kali, and were ruled by 2 queens who adopted the names of these 2 regions, Queen Prema and Queen Kali. Both kingdoms were looking for an effective remedy for their relentless thirst. But what made them different were the paths they chose to remedy from this evil of which no one could escape. On the one hand, in the kingdom of Prema, the sovereign had established laws from the beginning to be able to help her citizens overcome the obstacles that were now part of their lives. The queen dictated some rules and ensured that they were enforced in all homes. These were based on respecting the now most precious asset of their nature, water. She set a daily amount of its consumption for each family, making sure enough that its consumption was an abuse, and as if this resource was only obtained in a non-aggressive or excessive manner, avoiding damaging nature and the environment that surrounded them. If there is something that Queen Prema had understood in this whole affair, is that the abuse of power from mankind had engendered this evil, and therefore there was only one way to eradicate it. Hereafter, everything would be based on moderation, respect, and gratitude towards Mother Nature, who so pleasantly shared her riches. She built reservoirs and canals to be able to store the precious commodity, as to then manage it to each household in a consistent and respectful way. All citizens were obliged to work united, so that this new way of life was successfully established in the region, and little by little, almost without realizing it, peace and unity reigned in this town again. But what was exactly the reason for this? Very simple. As time went by, citizens got their bodies accustomed to receiving only small amounts of water, which they savored, appreciated, and thanked in each sip. With this method, their needs began to decrease almost magically. Each time they were able to quench their thirst with lesser amounts of water, and in parallel to this, they were satiating themselves with something they had forgotten they had: love. The perfect plan of the Queen to make them understand that they all had the same needs and that they could only be solved with joint collaboration caused them to grow and develop again as part of a whole that also based its main affection on respect and the harmony among their fellow men and women and towards the generous Mother Nature. Left behind were the abuses of power and the selfish aggrandizement of beings in this land. Now, as it had been initially, peace reigned in Prema, and what once seemed to be a bitter medicine had become an unprecedented remedy. But the Queen of Prema didn't enjoy complete peace. Since her earliest youth, she had the power to rule through magical and revealing dreams, which had always served as her most unconditional guides. This is where the kingdom of Kali enters our story. Queen Prema had seen in a dream how her neighbors of Kali were drowning in their own thirst because their sovereign had been immersed in fear and anguish, accumulating large amounts of water only for herself. Water from which she couldn't stop drinking, since the more she ingested, the more she seemed to need, and little by little she found herself wrapped in a circle from which she was unable to get out of. On the other hand, her people had been left abandoned after the Queen's upheavals. They fought among themselves to seize all water that they found in their path for themselves, regardless of how they achieved it, despite this having the devastating consequences in places that had been rich treasures of water, turning them into huge, dry, arid deserts. Chaos now reigned in the kingdom of Kali. Everything was allowed as long as it quenched thirst, but far from quenching, it got stronger and powerful each time. Queen Prema knew that the citizens of her neighboring kingdom had not attempted to assault her because they were unable to cross the arid deserts which they'd created themselves, as she was aware they'd survive only if she helped them. For this reason, she began to send messengers from the kingdom of Prema to cross the desert and reach up the palace of Queen Kali to reveal the secret with which her people could re-emerge. But mysteriously, these people never returned and nobody knew the reason why. This made Prema to range in the uncertainty and the discomfort, and the family and friends of the sent messengers to gather at the palace to ask the queen to find a way to get them home as early as possible. That same night, the queen went to bed early and wholeheartedly asked for an answer to be granted in her dreams that would meet the needs of her people. Soon she fell into a deep sleep, and the revealing answers began to emerge. In the first place, she observed what had been the destination of the sent messengers. She saw how they crossed this desert smoothly despite the fatigue and thirst that the trip produced. Then they got into the palace of Queen Kali, and she offered them jugs and jugs of water in exchange for the precious message that they promised to bring. The envoys drank all the water, as the trip through the scorching desert was hard. But after ingesting it, they seemed to forget everything they came to say. What's more, they got into a state of intoxication from which it was impossible for them to get off of, and they were trapped in Kali without knowing how, when, or why they were there. But this wasn't all that Queen Prema received at night in dreams. She had to call upon a specific family from her lands to undertake the mission in Kali as briefly as possible. But this time there was a condition. They couldn't cross the desert road. They had to travel through the unknown places that no mortal had traversed till this day to reach Kali.